The one you called brother stands before the world and declares you a serpent. Your allies look away. The crowd gathers stones. This is not the moment of your ruin. This is the moment of your ascension, and your enemy has just handed you the ladder. The only question is whether you have the courage to climb. When the attack comes, and it will always come, the ordinary man feels it as a wound, a personal violation. The words of the accuser are like a hot brand on the skin, the betrayal of an ally a shard of ice in the heart. His first instinct, born from a lifetime of social conditioning, is to react, to cry out. He feels the rush of blood to his face, the tightening in his chest. This is the fever of the ego, the sacred fury of the wronged. He believes this emotion is his strength. He believes his righteous anger is a weapon. In truth, it is the first link in the chain his enemy will use to bind him. He takes the stage of public opinion and performs the predictable dance of the victim. He denies the accusations with trembling passion. He points to his past good deeds, his unimpeachable character, his noble intentions. He appeals to a sense of fairness, of justice, of cosmic order that simply does not exist in the corridors of power. He bleeds his sincerity for all to see, hoping to win the sympathy of the crowd. But the crowd is a fickle beast, drawn more to the spectacle of a downfall than the tedious theater of innocence. His enemy watches from the shadows, a faint smile on his lips. The emotional outburst was not an unforeseen consequence. It was the intended outcome. It was the first trap, and it has been sprung perfectly. By reacting with honest, raw emotion, the idealist has surrendered his greatest asset: control. He is no longer the master of his own strategy. He is a respondent, a reactor, a puppet whose strings are pulled by the slightest insult. His enemy now dictates the time, the place, and the nature of the conflict. The idealist is so consumed with defending the wound of yesterday that he cannot see the dagger being prepared for tomorrow. He believes he is fighting for his honor, but what he is truly doing is confirming his own impotence. He shows the world that he can be moved, that his composure can be shattered, that his judgment can be clouded by a well-aimed stone. He has mistaken the battle for the war, and in the world as it is, not as it should be, this mistake is fatal. His demand for justice is heard by no one but himself, an empty echo in a colosseum that only respects victory. The prince, however, understands a fundamental and immutable truth. An attack is not a wound to be healed. It is a body to be dissected. When the arrow flies, he does not feel its sting. He does not concern himself with the archer's malice or the poison on the tip. Instead, he plucks it from the air and begins his examination. He is not a warrior in this moment. He is a physician, a surgeon of power. His first action is not to react, but to withdraw. Not in fear, but in cold, sublime calculation. He retreats to a silent room, where the only sound is the turning of gears in his own mind. The world outside may be a tempest of accusation and rumor, but within the prince's mind is the absolute calm of the operating theater. Emotion is a fog that obscures the landscape of reality. The prince has learned to let this fog dissipate, to observe his own anger, his own pride, as a physician observes a patient's fever, a symptom to be noted, understood, and then set aside. He does not ask, "How could they do this to me?" This is the question of a child. He asks, "Why this attack and why now?" He asks, "What does this action reveal about my enemy's fears, about his resources, about his ultimate objective?" The attack, you see, is a message. The insult is merely the crude envelope in which it is delivered. The common man tears the envelope in a rage and sets it on fire. The prince discards the envelope and calmly unfolds the letter within. He lays the problem out on the table. The nature of the accusation. Is it designed to incite hatred, ridicule, or fear? The timing. Does it coincide with a moment of his own perceived weakness, or a moment of his enemy's desperation? The messenger. Who delivered the blow? A rival? A pawn? A former ally turned traitor? Each detail is a clue. Each piece of information is a thread. The prince is not looking for vindication. He is looking for a pattern. He is mapping the anatomy of his enemy's strategy. He recognizes, as Machiavelli teaches, that men are driven by two primary forces, fear and necessity. The attack is a manifestation of one of these. Is my enemy afraid of my growing power and thus seeks to cut me down before I rise further? Or is he in desperate need of something I possess, a position, an alliance, a resource, and this attack is a crude attempt to seize it? The answer to this question will determine everything that follows. It is the difference between amputating a limb and merely dressing a minor scrape. One cannot apply the correct remedy without a perfect diagnosis. This is the logic of the surgeon. It is ruthless, impersonal, and devastatingly effective. It transforms the curse of reaction into the gift of unparalleled clarity. For he who is quick to anger is quick to fall into a trap. The world is not a stage for your honor, but a laboratory for your ambition. Comment "The mind is the scalpel" to adopt this surgical precision, and subscribe to learn how to make the first incision. The diagnosis is complete. You have separated the signal from the noise, the intent from the insult. The body of the aggression lies before you, its secrets exposed by the cold light of your reason. Now the surgeon must select his instruments. A lesser man, a butcher, would reach for the cleaver at once, eager to hack away at the source of his agitation. But the prince understands that the art of power is not in the violence of the incision, but in its absolute, irrefutable precision. The counterattack is not a single action, but a clinical procedure in 3 phases, a sequence designed not merely to end the threat, but to re-engineer the very landscape of power in your favor. This is the anatomy of a perfect response. The first and most critical instrument you will employ is the principle of cause and effect. The common strategist fights what is in front of him, the slander, the maneuver, the invading army. He expends all his energy battling these symptoms, these phantoms. He may even win the skirmish, pushing back the immediate offensive, only to find another rise in its place, for he has done nothing to cure the underlying disease. The prince, having completed his diagnosis, ignores the soldier on the field and aims his entire strategy at the mind of the general who sent him. He has already determined the origin of the incursion. It is either a product of your adversary's fear or a consequence of his necessity. These 2 sources of human action are not the same, and to treat them as such is a catastrophic error. If your opponent attacks from a place of fear, fear of your ascent, fear of your potential, fear of your shadow eclipsing his own, then his actions will be characterized by a certain frantic, preemptive violence. He strikes not to gain, but to prevent a loss. This fear is a powerful explosive, but it is also unstable. Your task is not to meet his aggression with your own, which would only justify his paranoia in the eyes of others. Instead, your strategy must be to subtly and systematically validate his terror. You must become the very specter he imagines you to be, but only in whispers, only in the periphery. You allow rumors of your new strengths to circulate. You orchestrate small, inexplicable victories by unseen hands. You let him see you in quiet conversation with his own allies. You do not show him your sword. You allow him to imagine an entire legion hidden just behind the hill. This measured psychological pressure will amplify his paranoia, compelling him to act with increasing recklessness. He will double his efforts, exhaust his resources, and alienate his supporters with his escalating hysteria, all while fighting a ghost you have masterfully projected. You are not battling him at all. You are merely providing him with enough rope to hang himself from the gallows of his own anxieties. His fear becomes the architect of his own destruction. If, however, the aggression is born of necessity, if your rival desperately needs a resource you control, an office you hold, or a territory you govern, his strategy will be different. It will be more focused, more direct, a calculated gambit to seize what he requires to survive. To meet this with simple destruction is inefficient. To annihilate a man dying of thirst is to waste the opportunity his thirst provides. Here the prince's response is one of insidious control. You do not deny him what he needs. You offer it to him, but as a poisoned gift. You allow him a small victory, a taste of the resource he craves, just enough to make him dependent. You give him the loan he needs, but with terms that will eventually make you his master. You cede the minor territory he covets, knowing it will overextend his supply lines and make him vulnerable. You orchestrate events so that the very thing he sought becomes his prison. Your counterattack is not a blow, but an act of calculated generosity that fosters a fatal dependency. You do not destroy your adversary. You transform him into an asset, a vassal whose survival is now inextricably linked to your goodwill. You have not ended the threat. You have absorbed it, turning his desperation into a new pillar for your own throne. This is the ultimate victory, not to defeat your enemy, but to make the very concept of enemy obsolete. The second principle in this anatomy is the doctrine of calculated dissimulation. As Machiavelli observed, men are deceived by appearances. While you are dissecting the cause of the attack and preparing your precise countermeasure, the world is watching. Your opponent is watching. They expect a reaction. They anticipate anger, denial, or fear. You will give them exactly what they expect, but as a performance, you must become the greatest actor of the age. Your public face is now a strategic tool, a mask designed to create a false reality for your adversary to inhabit. If they expect rage, you will show them a carefully controlled temper, just enough to convince them they have struck a nerve, while your mind remains as placid as a frozen lake. If they expect weakness, you will feign confusion, indecision, perhaps even a hint of despair. Let your rival believe his poison is working. Let him be buoyed by a triumphant arrogance. This dissimulation serves a dual purpose. First, it buys you the most precious of all commodities: time. While your opponent celebrates his apparent success, he grows complacent. His guard lowers. His focus softens. He believes the game is nearing its end, while for you, it has only just begun. Second, and more importantly, it creates a strategic fog. You are actively misleading his senses. While he is distracted by the puppet show of your feigned vulnerability, your real work continues unseen. In the shadows, you are severing his lines of support. You are turning his allies against him with carefully planted truths. You are repositioning your own assets for the final, decisive move. The more convincing your performance of weakness, the more your enemy will overextend himself, moving his pieces across the board with a foolish confidence, walking ever deeper into the labyrinth you have constructed around him. He will not realize his error until the very last moment, when the path behind him has vanished and the walls have closed in. He will think he has been the hunter, when all along he has been the prey, meticulously herded towards an end of your own design. Finally, the surgeon of power must master the most misunderstood of all techniques: inertia as a weapon. In a world that glorifies frantic action, the capacity for strategic stillness is a form of power so profound that few can comprehend it. To do nothing is often the most aggressive and devastating move one can make. When an assault is built on public outrage, fabricated scandal, or a coalition of fickle allies, it requires your response to sustain its momentum. Your anger is its fuel. Your defense is its oxygen. It needs you to engage, to wrestle with it in the mud, to give it legitimacy by acknowledging it as a worthy threat. The prince, in certain calculated circumstances, denies it this satisfaction. He meets the roaring firestorm of accusation with an absolute and unnerving silence. This is not the silence of fear or indecision. It is the silence of the mountain in the face of the wind. The wind howls, it beats against the stone. It expends all its fury, and in the end it is the wind that dissipates, exhausted and broken. The mountain remains. By refusing to participate in your enemy's drama, you reframe the entire conflict. You implicitly state that his aggression is so insignificant that it does not merit a response. This act of supreme confidence can shatter an opponent's morale more effectively than any direct assault. Without your engagement, his accusations begin to sound shrill and desperate. The audience, initially intrigued by the spectacle, grows bored. They begin to look at the aggressor, flailing wildly against an immovable object, and see not a warrior, but a fool. Your inertia forces him to escalate. He must shout louder, make wilder claims, take greater risks to provoke the reaction he so desperately needs. And with each escalation, he makes a new mistake, reveals a new weakness, and further isolates himself. Your stillness becomes a vacuum, pulling him forward into a void of his own making. You have won without lifting a finger, proving that the ultimate power is not the ability to wage war, but the authority to decide if a war is worth fighting at all. You have moved beyond the realm of instinct and into the cold calculus of strategy. The instruments are chosen, the procedure is designed. But before the first incision is made upon the world, the final preparations must take place within the most secret and essential of chambers, the laboratory of your own mind. For the world of men is not governed by facts or by justice. It is a chaotic sea of perception, emotion, and appetite. The prince is not a mariner who prays for calm seas. He is a chemist who understands the composition of the water itself. He does not fear the storm. He studies its properties. Before he can command the elements outside, he must achieve an absolute and chilling mastery over the elements within. This is the great work, the silent, unseen alchemy that transmutes the base metal of human feeling into the imperishable gold of dominion. The first and most arduous experiment is performed upon yourself. The attack was designed not only to damage your reputation, but to colonize your mind. It is a poison meant to seep into your thoughts, to breed paranoia, to incite a fever of vengeful passion. The prince recognizes these internal stirrings, the sting of wounded pride, the hot flush of anger, the cold grip of fear, not as authentic parts of his own being, but as foreign agents, biological weapons deployed by his adversary. To act upon them would be to surrender his inner citadel without a fight. Therefore, he begins the process of vivisection upon his own soul. He places his emotions under a microscope. He observes his anger not as a righteous force, but as a chemical reaction, a surge of chemicals in the blood. He quantifies it, notes its triggers, and traces its predictable, often foolish impulses. He regards his fear not as a valid warning, but as a vestigial reflex from a time when survival depended on flight rather than foresight. This is the ultimate dominion, to become the dispassionate observer of your own internal chaos. You do not suppress these feelings. Suppression creates a pressure that will inevitably explode. Instead, you detach. You grant them no authority. You listen to their desperate arguments as a king listens to the pleas of a hysterical courtier, with mild interest, but without the slightest intention of altering his decree. This internal disengagement is the source of the prince's unshakable mindset. While his opponent is drunk on the wine of his own aggression, the prince remains sober, his judgment unclouded, his hand steady. He has conquered the first and most treacherous kingdom, himself. This victory is never announced with trumpets. It is a silent coronation that takes place in the solitude of his will, but it is the one victory from which all others flow. He who has mastered his own nature can now begin the work of mastering the nature of others. With this internal clarity achieved, the prince turns his gaze outward. The world is now his theater, and the ongoing conflict is a grand play. He understands, as Machiavelli taught, that the vast majority of men are spectators, not participants. They do not judge events by a meticulous examination of the facts. They judge by the visceral impact of the performance. The battle for power is therefore a battle for the narrative. The idealist tries to win this battle with truth, a clumsy and often ineffective weapon. The prince wins it by becoming the superior storyteller, the master dramatist. His response to the attack will not be a mere refutation. It will be a new act in the play, one that recasts all the characters and redefines the plot. Depending on the nature of the attack and the disposition of the audience, he can choose from a wardrobe of meticulously crafted personas. He might adopt the mask of the stoic martyr, absorbing the most vicious slanders with a profound and dignified silence. He allows the accusations to accumulate, to become increasingly shrill, until his lack of response makes his attacker seem like a madman shouting at a cathedral. The crowd's sentiment, initially swayed by the aggression, slowly turns to pity and then to admiration for his resilience. His silence becomes a more eloquent defense than 1,000 words. Alternatively, he might become the reluctant guardian of the state. He will publicly lament the conflict, stating how he wishes only for peace and stability. He will frame his adversary's actions as a threat not to himself, but to the common good. Every counter-move is then presented not as an act of personal vengeance, but as a sad and heavy duty, a necessary surgery to remove a cancer from the body politic. He does not seize power, he is burdened with it for the sake of everyone else. The audience, eager to believe in a benevolent authority, will applaud his manufactured self-sacrifice. The choice of role is a matter of pure strategic utility. The goal is singular: to isolate the adversary, to strip him of his allies, to erode his support, to make his position so morally untenable that he becomes a pariah. The prince orchestrates the opinions of others by providing them with a more compelling, more emotionally satisfying story than the one offered by his rival. He does not argue with the existing narrative. He simply renders it obsolete by creating a better one. He understands that men do not follow the man who is right. They follow the man whose story makes them feel secure, virtuous, and part of something grand. But what if the audience is skeptical? What if the facts seem to be on the side of the aggressor? In such cases, a masterful performance is not enough. The laboratory must move from psychology to the manufacturing of reality itself. Machiavelli notes with a cynical clarity that he who deceives will always find those who are willing to be deceived. Men are not disciples of truth. They are slaves to their own needs and biases. They yearn for evidence that confirms what they already wish to believe. The prince does not disappoint them. He forges the evidence. This is not the work of a common liar who is easily exposed. This is the work of an architect of circumstances. He might employ the selective truth, releasing a piece of verifiable information that, stripped of its context, paints his adversary in a monstrous light. He might orchestrate a peripheral event, a minor act of charity on his own part, or a spontaneous failure on the part of his rival's allies, that seems to validate the narrative he is constructing. The most effective propaganda is not a poster, but a deed. He can engineer a small crisis that only he is equipped to solve, demonstrating his indispensability at the precise moment his value is being questioned. He can use proxies and third parties, leaking information through sources that appear neutral or even hostile to him, knowing that a truth whispered by an enemy is believed more readily than one shouted from his own ramparts. This is the highest form of the art, to build a prison of perception around your enemy, a prison whose bars are forged from his own actions, interpreted through the lens you have provided. You do not need to invent falsehoods when you can so skillfully arrange the truths. By the time the final act begins, the original attack has been all but forgotten. It is a mere footnote in the epic you have authored. You have not simply defended yourself. You have fundamentally altered the terrain of reality. The public does not believe you are innocent. Their minds can no longer even conceive of your guilt. They are living in the world you built for them. And in that world, your victory is not just a possibility. It is a foregone conclusion. You have diagnosed the illness, prepared the operating theater, and controlled the mind. The human variables have been accounted for. The public stage has been set. And the enemy, blinded by his own momentum, is precisely where you need him to be. Now, before we deliver the final curative blow, ensure you are subscribed. For the knowledge of how to close the wound and rebuild the body, politic is what separates a mere butcher from a true sovereign. The butcher leaves a scar and a memory of pain. The sovereign leaves a new and unshakable order, where the memory of the disease serves only to reinforce the perfection of the cure. The moment of execution, the masterstroke, is never what the adversary expects. He anticipates a frontal assault, a furious counteraccusation, a desperate move in the great game. He is prepared for a storm. What he receives is a change in the laws of physics. The prince's decisive action is not a blow, it is an inversion. It is the sudden and silent reversal of the entire dynamic of power. All the energy the aggressor has expended, all the momentum he has built, is captured and used to orchestrate his own downfall. Imagine a master of a martial art who does not block a punch, but instead grasps the extended arm and uses the opponent's own force to throw him to the ground. The final move is just this, an act of sublime, strategic jiu-jitsu. This is the point where all your preparations converge. The dissimulation you practiced in public has led your adversary to overextend his resources. The anatomical knowledge you gained through your initial diagnosis has revealed the keystone of his power structure, the single pillar upon which his entire edifice rests. It is never the man himself. It may be his wealth, his primary alliance, his reputation for integrity, or the loyalty of a single, crucial lieutenant. The prince does not waste his strength launching a broadside attack against the whole fortress. He applies a small, precise, and irresistible pressure to that single critical point, and he does it at the moment of his enemy's greatest perceived triumph. As the rival stands before the world, believing you are cornered and defeated, you trigger the mechanism you have so patiently constructed in the shadows. Perhaps a piece of information you acquired in your diagnosis is released, not by you, but by a seemingly neutral third party, which irrevocably severs his primary financial backing. Perhaps the trusted lieutenant, with whom you have been in secret communication, publicly abandons him, citing a moral crisis and taking with him the legitimacy he conferred. Perhaps the very narrative he used to attack you is suddenly and brilliantly recontextualized with new evidence you have forged, revealing him not as a righteous crusader, but as a manipulative fraud. The action itself is almost anticlimactic in its speed and elegance. There is no grand battle. There is only a quiet, sharp click, and then the entire structure of his power begins to unravel, stone by stone, until nothing remains but a pile of dust. He is not defeated by your strength. He is undone by the fatal flaws in his own design, which you did not create but merely illuminated for the world to see. He is left standing alone on a stage he built, under a spotlight you now control, exposed not as a tyrant but as an irrelevance. With the rival neutralized, the common man believes the war is over. He would celebrate, rest, and enjoy the spoils. This is why the common man never rules. For the prince, the moment of victory is the most dangerous moment of all. The vacuum of power is an invitation to new challenges, and the memory of instability is a poison that can linger for generations. The true work, the work of consolidation, now begins. The prince does not celebrate, he builds. His first act is to follow Machiavelli's timeless counsel regarding injuries. They must be done all at once. Every remaining vestige of the old threat, every loyalist, every supporting structure, every lingering sentiment must be excised with the swift and impersonal finality of a surgeon removing the last trace of a tumor. This must be a single, terrifying, and comprehensive purge. It is not an act of cruelty for its own sake. Cruelty that is drawn out, hesitant, and piecemeal only breeds resentment and the desire for revenge. A single, decisive act of political extermination, however, creates a chilling and permanent peace. It is a terrible spectacle, but its purpose is to ensure that such a spectacle will never be necessary again. This is what it means to salt the earth. You do not merely defeat your opponent, you eradicate the very conditions that allowed him to rise. You dismantle his networks, absorb his assets, and rewrite his history. His name must become a cautionary tale, a synonym for ambition that overreaches its grasp. You then immediately begin the second phase of Machiavelli's advice. Benefits should be dispensed little by little. To those who were wavering but ultimately did not oppose you, you show calculated magnanimity. To those who stood by you, you distribute rewards, honors, and positions, binding them to your new regime not just with fear, but with the sweet nectar of self-interest. You establish new laws, new traditions, new institutions that are all designed to perpetuate your authority. The objective is not merely to sit upon the throne, it is to rebuild the throne itself, to fashion a new political reality in which your position is not just defended, but is the natural, undisputed center of gravity. You make your power systemic. This brings us to the final philosophical conclusion. The unshakable mindset is not a defense against the world's aggression. It is an understanding that the world's aggression is the raw material from which an enduring state is forged. The attack was not a threat to your stability. It was the divine opportunity to achieve a level of stability you could never have reached in times of peace. It was a diagnostic tool that revealed every weakness in your own foundation and every fissure in the foundations of your rivals. It was the fire that allowed you to burn away the dead wood and impurities. It was the pressure that fused disparate elements into a new, unbreakable whole. The prince does not pray for a life free from conflict. He understands that conflict is the eternal engine of creation and destruction. His sole aim is to become its master, to harness its chaotic energy and use it to sculpt a lasting order. The supreme power is not the absence of war. It is the ability to transform the very essence of war into the architecture of a durable peace, a peace built on the clear-eyed recognition of human nature as it is, and secured by a will strong enough to do what is necessary. The throne you now occupy is not one you inherited or were given. It is a throne you built yourself from the bones of those who sought to pull you down. And that is the only kind of throne that truly lasts.